Welcome to Black Swan Revelations. My name is Shane, and in today's video, we are going to be diving into the plight of Joseph. Joseph is a fascinating character, and if you've ever come across this story, it's basically a story about betrayal, redemption, and ultimately divine providence. So it's a fascinating study. There are times where I'll read the story of Joseph and just for some reason the air conditioning gets turned on or something in my office here, even though we don't have air conditioning, and I just can't help it. I get teary-eyed and I have to close the book and walk away for a bit, regather myself, and then finish reading the story. It's such a powerful story, such a powerful story. When you think about it, Joseph's adventure basically begins when he's about 17 years old. So we have to be mindful of that. So I'm not going to read the whole story, but I'm going to basically dive into where basically after Joseph was sold to the Ishmaelites and he's now in Egypt. And perhaps I might make this into a mini series. Who knows? So, but before we begin, this is kind of an interesting book. Rembrandt. I don't know if you've ever heard of this guy, born in the 1600s. He was born in 1609, died in 1969, exactly 300 years before I was born. So it's kind of interesting. I went through some of this guy's portraits in this book, and they are absolutely mind altering. And this is a self-portrait that he did of himself when he was younger. This is him when he's older. So it's very fascinating. One of these portraits that stood out to me, and let me just see. I don't know if this camera can show this. This is one interesting thing that kind of stood out. Oh, there's just about every painting stands out. You could just study it. Well, this one here, I don't know if you could see this one. This is the betrayal of Samson. So I don't know if you could see that. This might not do it justice. But you could see a bunch of soldiers. There's like 3 or 4 soldiers holding Samson down. Delilah has a lock of hair with some scissors or a knife. And there's one guy holding Samson down. Basically, he's got like a chokehold on him. And the guy above him is also holding Samson, and he's gouging his eye out with a knife, while another soldier's in front of Samson with a dagger or spear. And there's still more soldiers trying to hold Samson's arms and legs, and it's crazy, man. Crazy. Like the detail that goes into it. Yeah, basically there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 soldiers. And one of the soldiers that fell on the ground that's holding Samson, it's basically he has him in a bear hug and he's on the ground holding Samson and his helmet fell off. Meanwhile, the guy above him has a chain around his wrist to hold his right arm back so he can't fight, while another soldier sticks a dagger in his eyes to gouge out both of his eyes. So I can't imagine what that would have been like for Samson when he woke up and to have that experience of normally he would just dust himself off and get out of there as before, but not so. Like when you see this, you could really see the struggle that he's going through. And yeah, it's definitely some kind of shears that Delilah's holding in her hands with a huge lock of hair. And that was enough to subdue Samson. It's crazy. But yeah, there's just tons of portraits here in this book. It's crazy. The detail. Like you can't help but just stare at it. Like even this one here, this one was painted in 1627. This is Paul in prison. And you could see the parchments, and he's deep in thought, writing a letter, one of his prison letters. Just kind of interesting. Deep in thought. What else is there that's kind of interesting? Like all of them are amazing. The crucifixion is quite amazing. And even the idea that they're taking him down from the cross. I believe it was Simeon and Jos Joseph, I believe it was. Took him down. There's a few more characters in this picture, but I don't know if you could see that. Basically, they're taking Jesus down from the cross. It's actually an amazing book. And yeah, like all his portraits are he's probably one of the best in the world at lighting. It's absolutely amazing the way he uses shading and everything. And these are paintings, which is, yeah, anyways, very cool book. All right, so let's go into Joseph a little bit here. If you haven't had a chance yet, make sure and if you've watched this video or if you watch this video to the end, make sure and give me a thumbs up. That just lets YouTube know an algorithm that you like this type of content and it'll show this video to more people. That's it. Just asking you for one thing. Give a thumbs up. All right, so let's jump into Genesis chapter 39. And Joseph was brought down to Egypt, and Potiphar, an officer of Pharaoh, captain of the guard, an Egyptian, brought him to the hands, bought him, so he purchased him, of the hands of the Ishmaelites, which had brought him down thither. And the Lord was with Joseph, and he was a prosperous man. And he was in the house of his master, the Egyptian. And his master saw that the Lord was with him, and that the Lord made all that he did to prosper in his hand. And Joseph found grace in his sight, and he served him. And he made him overseer over his house, and all that he had put into his hand. And it came to pass from the time that he had made him overseer in his house and over all that he had, that the Lord blessed the Egyptian's house for Joseph's sake. And the blessing of the Lord was upon all that he had in the house and in the field. So this is kind of interesting. I never caught that before, but also in the field. And this can come into play a little bit later on. So we see here that Joseph has experience also in the field, as in managing his crops. And he left all that he had in Joseph's hand, and he knew not aught he had, save the bread which he did eat. And Joseph was a goodly person and well favored. So the way that I look at that verse 6, is that Potiphar put everything in his hand, and he was not concerned because it was under the care of Joseph, his field, everything. The only thing that he seemed to be particular about is the bread that he ate. And I don't know if perhaps Joseph was maybe trying to introduce him to unleavened bread, and he's like, no, I like Egyptian bread better. Don't know. Don't know. But seems like perhaps he had a unique taste for bread. And that was the only thing that concerned him, was the food that he ate. That's about it. Maybe that was the only thing that he would tell Joseph, this is the type of food I would like you to make. But everything else was under Joseph's care, including the field, his field. So again, Potiphar is an officer of Pharaoh, captain of the guard. So probably one of the highest ranking guards in Egypt. So there could have been several captains, but for sure that was his rank as a captain. And it came to pass after these things that his master's wife cast her eyes upon Joseph, and she said, lie with me. It's interesting, right? Here you have a slave purchased by Potiphar, a Hebrew, and everything was put under his care, under the care of Joseph. And Potiphar's wife, perhaps Potiphar was out, and Potiphar's wife noticed Joseph and how business was very successful. And I think in some ways this is a bit of an allure for some women that like that, where they see a young man, probably physically fit, strong, and everything he touched was successful, and she became infatuated with that. So she wanted to sleep with him. But he refused, and said unto his master's wife, behold, my master wotteth not what is with me in his house, and he hath committed all that he hath to my hand. There is none greater in this house than I, neither hath he kept back anything from me but thee. Which is interesting that he says that. So perhaps he could have had a conversation. Look, everything in this house is yours. Consider it yours. You can do whatever you want with it. The only thing that you can't touch is my wife. That's it. Who knows? He might have just mentioned that. We don't know. But he says, neither hath he kept back anything from me but thee. That's the only thing that he kept back from me, is you, because thou art his wife. Makes sense. How then can I do this great wickedness and sin against God? So Potiphar, perhaps, again, I'm inferring, said to Joseph, everything is yours except this woman, which is my wife. And maybe it was just made an introduction. This is my wife. So then Joseph is, how can I do this great wickedness and sin against God? And it came to pass, as she spake to Joseph day by day, that he hearkened not unto her, to lie by her or to be with her. So it's interesting that she just wanted to talk to him some days, and other days she wanted to sleep with him. And she just wanted him to be with her, hang out with her. Just, Joseph, don't worry. I'm not going to bug you about sleeping with you today. Just hang out with me. Just hang with me. But Joseph basically says here in verse 10 that he hearkened not unto her to lie by her. So she just wanted to snuggle some days. Just lie beside me. We don't have to have sex. We don't have to have intercourse. But just lie beside me. What's the harm in lying down beside me? And then you can tell me your dreams and just talk to me. What's the harm in that? So he didn't listen to her. to lie by her or to be with her at all. He didn't want to be with her at all. Dangerous. She's a dangerous woman. And it came to pass about this time that Joseph went into the house to do his business. And I think, based on everything that I've read in Genesis about Joseph, I think he was a workaholic. I think he was laser focused on the task at hand. And it came to pass about this time that Joseph went into the house to do his business, and there was none of the men of the house therein. So this might have been something out of the ordinary, where when Joseph comes in to do his business, there's nobody in the house. It's like, something is aloft. And she caught him by his garment, saying, lie with me. Now she wants him to sleep with her. And he left his garment in her hand and fled and got him out. So again, it's interesting that he hearkened not unto her to lie by her, not lie with her, but lie by her, or to be with her. And then now she's like, lie with me. She wants to sleep with this guy. And he left his garment in her hand and fled and got him out. This is in essence where we get the word escape from. Escape. Escape. You escape from your cape, whatever garment or cloak that you are wearing. We see this in the Gospel of Mark, where there was a young man, where the soldiers went to grab this young man, unidentified, and he fled naked. He escaped because they caught his garment. And many people, including myself, believe that this was Mark. This was almost like a self-portrait, if you will. This is how often authors would talk about themselves, would say, without saying, this was me. They don't generally write that way. Like, I was here in the garment and then I fled and all this stuff. Usually they would use it almost like a third person observation, just quite like Rembrandt. He paints a picture. Sometimes he would, not only he would do self-portraits of him looking in the mirror and then capturing everything, but he would also insert himself into paintings as well. There was one painting of the stoning of Stephen where he actually puts himself in the crowd, which is interesting because you could almost do the same thing for us, put us in the crowd. So Joseph fled. And it came to pass, when she saw that he had left his garment in her hand and was fled forth, that she called unto the men of her house. So now she brings back the men into the house and spake unto them, saying, see, he, meaning her husband, hath brought in an Hebrew unto us to mock us. He came in unto me to lie with me, and I cried with a loud voice. And because she cried, this would be considered rape. If she didn't cry out and nobody heard, this is probably what caused the men to run into the house, is she waited till Joseph fled and then had a plan and screamed so that the men came into the house with a loud voice. And she said, I cried with a loud voice. So that is a case for rape now, because in Leviticus, which doesn't come into play about at least 400 years later, when Moses starts writing all this stuff down, he writes out when to stone a woman or a man when they're committing fornication or adultery, etc., all this kind of stuff. So one of the instances is if a man seduces a woman and sleeps with her, whether it's out in the field somewhere, and she does not scream, that means consent. It was consent. But if she screams, that is rape, and he is to be stoned, and she's to be compensated as well because he humiliated her. Not both of them. The man is to be stoned. Why? Because it was rape, and it's a capital punishment to rape a woman. So in this case here, we see the first instance of an accusation for rape. Why? Because she cried out loud. Now Joseph is going to get tried for rape. And it came to pass, when he heard that I lifted up my voice and cried, that he left his garment with me and fled and got him out. And she laid up his garment by her until his Lord came home. So now she has evidence as well, and she could tell her story and say, this is what happened. The slave that you brought here humiliated me. He lied with me. And when I screamed, he left. He fled. And here's his cloak. Here's his garment. Pretty hard to argue. Pretty hard to argue. But to Joseph, it was better to leave something behind and escape with his life than to be caught, because perhaps, let's just say, for example, what if this was also a setup as well, that he did decide to lie with her and she screamed rape? Now his conscience is also severed, and there's nothing that he could do about it because now he's sentenced or will be sentenced for rape. So she could be tricking him for all we know. We don't know what her motive was, but we know she's also disgusted with Hebrews as well. It's a disdain because Hebrews were known as uh, sheep herders, if you will. It's disgusting. It's a disgusting trait, a disgusting occupation to the Egyptians. And this comes to play later. She laid up his garment by her until his Lord came home. It's interesting, right? And she spake unto him according to these words, saying, the Hebrew servant which thou hast brought unto us came in unto me to mock me. And it came to pass, as I lifted up my voice and cried, that he left his garment with me and fled out. Now, mock, some people would look at this and go, okay, mock, Joseph is just making fun. But the mocking is almost like this was his whole plan from day one, was to act and pretend in order to sleep with me, your wife. He was mocking us the whole time, making sport of us. Which is interesting because later, when Samson had his eyes gouged out, they put him in a mill to grind, and depends who you talk to. Some people think it was like they wanted his seed to um, impregnate other women so that they could absorb or have the same strength, like their children could have the same strength and powers that Samson had. That's just one person's theory or one group of people's idea. So the grinding would be him in prison, and he was forced to have sex with women in order to steal his seed, if you will. And others say, well, he's just grinding. He's grinding wheat or whatever behind a mill, and that was his thing. And we've seen this in movies. So depending what source you want to believe or lean to, um, it wasn't good for Samson. And don't forget, they gouged out his eyes, and then one day he's brought out to the temple of Dagon in order for them to make sport of him. And most likely he was butt naked in the temple, and they wanted to observe his nakedness while he's blind and make fun of him. And who knows if they wanted to do a massive orgy with him? Don't know. But that was some of the rituals that was happening back then. And there just happened to be a young man at his side that guided his hands to the appropriate pillars that, if he used the correct physics, would bring down the whole temple. And thus, Samson killed more people in his death than when he was alive. So this young lad, is a bit of a mystery, a bit of an enigma, because Samson says, guide my hands so that I could put my hands on these pillars. How did Samson know where he was? He's blind. So that is also an act of faith, because he said a prayer, Lord, avenge me for my eyes. It's kind of interesting. So she's telling her rape story to Potiphar, and it came to pass as I lifted up my garment, or as I lifted up my voice and cried, he left his garment with me and fled out. And it came to pass, when his master heard the words of his wife, which she spake to him unto him, saying, after this manner did thy servant to me, that his wrath was kindled. He was ticked. Now, to be fair, we're not sure that he was mad at her or that he was mad at the embarrassment of this predicament, because now, based on her words, he has to arrest one of his favorites, one that he had favor with. And this perhaps may not have been the first incident of his wife being promiscuous, because there was always men, slaves hanging around the house. We don't know. Again, I'm making a bit of an assumption that this perhaps wasn't her first rodeo. And Potiphar perhaps knew. Again, don't know. I'm inferring a lot here. But his wrath was kindled. Why do I say that Potiphar could have been mad more at his wife than at Joseph? Because if he was mad at Joseph, he would have killed him right there on the spot. He would have been jealous and killed him, executed him. He's the captain of Pharaoh, one of the captains, one of the main captains, if you will. And don't think that that wouldn't be an embarrassment to his men, knowing that his wife was raped by a young man like Joseph, and he let him go scot-free. So that's just a little bit of my inference that perhaps there's more going on behind the story here. Because look at this. And Joseph's master took him and put him into the prison, a place where the king's prisoners were bound. Not a slave prison, not where slaves will get their hands cut off and then put into another prison to never get out. This is the king's prison. Meaning, if the king / Pharaoh was upset, bakers, butlers, servants that work for him, they would go into this prison. And I think this prison was a little bit more of a posh prison, meaning this is not the worst prison to be in on the planet. Now, you could pose an argument that, yeah, he was in a bad prison, because in Psalms it talks about the idea that Joseph had fetters on his feet. So I don't want to infer too much because I always like to match scripture with scripture, but sometimes it's fun to imagine the surroundings. And this is a different prison than the worst of the worst. My humble belief. Why? Because there is a chance that these prisoners can come back to work for the king. It's not a death sentence. Not always. King gets mad, puts a servant in, has a dream or a vision, takes them out, puts them back to work. Maybe in a lesser position, maybe in a promotion. Who knows what it is? But sometimes it's a death sentence, sometimes it is not. All right. And Joseph's master took him and put him into the prison, a place where the king's prisoners were bound, and he was there in the prison. But the Lord was with Joseph and shewed him mercy and gave him favor in the sight of the keeper of the prison. And the keeper of the prison committed to Joseph's hand all the prisoners. So now, this is kind of interesting. Joseph is in charge of all the prisoners in prison. So he's the top guy in prison. And whatsoever they did there, he was the doer of it. It's an interesting way of putting it, the doer of it. The keeper of the prison, so the official keeper of the prison, looked not to anything that was under his hand, because the Lord was with him, and that which he did, the Lord made it to prosper. So the keeper of the prison noticed this gift in Joseph and basically put everything under him, in charge of all the prisoners. Interesting, right? It's kind of like when you think about reading some of the verses where Jesus led the captivity captive. Kind of puts a new spin on stuff. Captain of the prisoners. You know, Jesus has the keys of death and hell in his hand. And whatever door he opens cannot be closed, and whatever door he closes cannot be opened. I think we're talking about prison for people when they die, when we're talking about Jesus Christ having the keys of death and hell. We know, in the book of Revelation, that one set of keys actually unlocks the prison doors for anybody that believes in Jesus Christ, that he is the Son of God. If you believe that he died on the cross, rose again on the third day, and is alive forevermore, died, buried, rose again, we are also into that same baptism, because we too believe that we are risen from the dead, if you will. We're baptized into his death, and we're risen just as he has. We may not see that right now in this physical realm, but spiritually we are made alive. We are born again. So it's just kind of interesting when you think about it. So this is why I believe that when our physical bodies die, that we are instantly with the Lord in heaven, with our new heavenly bodies, our new spiritual bodies. Now, some people will say, well, are we talking physical or spiritual? And they're not really understanding the difference between the two. A better way of putting it is earthy and heavenly. An earthly body or a spiritual body that is heavenly. It's designed from Jesus Christ, by Jesus Christ, and these bodies are eternal. This is what we get. And I've hinted at that this perhaps could be the morning star that we are given. in the book of Revelation. I think it's in the first 4 chapters where Jesus says, if you overcome, I will give you the morning star. I think this is in reference to eternal life, into an angelic type body, if you will, one that can never be killed, immortal. And this is what we put on when we ditch this body. And I'll make another video about that. But I think there's something that we can dive a little bit deeper into these morning stars. It's kind of interesting. And Job talks about that, where God is like, where were you? Were you there when I was creating everything, the foundations, and the morning stars were singing, and the angels and all this were joyful, all this kind of stuff. So there's something there. Anyways, so the point is, Joseph is now under the keeper of the prison, and the keeper of the prison didn't really concern himself with any of the affairs of Joseph. So whenever a new prisoner from the king came in, Joseph was taking care of that guy. So that's it for this video, because we're going to go into the dreams and more favor with Joseph. And we're gonna continue with this series, but for now, this is just part 1. This is just like we're just doing a little snapshot here, a little focus, just diving in a little bit, and then we'll zoom out a bit. But I think it's always important. This is how I approach the Bible. Whenever I'm reading the Bible, to me, it's like a big movie with different scenes. This is how I read the Bible. I'm actually looking at, what does the prison look like? What did Joseph's environment look like when he was serving under Potiphar? Like, I could see it. And I don't know if it's influenced by movies that I've watched in the past, but it's interesting when you're reading the Word of God, after a while, it's like you're there. It's like Rembrandt. You're actually putting yourself into the Bible and you're observing everything that is going on. That's how I read the Bible. I look at the words and I'm like, okay, this is interesting that this was put here, this phrase or the way it's worded. And because I'm so familiar with reading only one version, that allows words to pop out at me. If you switch versions and you like the idea of reading 5 or 6 different versions, it doesn't give you a chance to seek out patterns and allow for patterns to jump out at you. Because I look at, whenever I go back to the New Testament, I start in Genesis, I'm keeping an eye on firsts, if you will. Oh, this is the first time we see the word lot, because later we hear instances of casting lots, and I'm like, oh, that's kind of interesting. What is a lot? Well, it goes back to Lot and Abraham, where they were both rich, had a lot of resources, and their men were fighting. And Abraham said to Lot, if you choose this way, I'll go this way. And if you choose this way, I'll go this way. That was a decision that Lot made. Lot had a choice. He made a vote with himself, basically. He's like looking this way towards Canaan, looks this way towards Sodom and Gomorrah and all the land, luscious, very luscious back then, and decided to go that way. So when you cast lots, you're basically doing a vote. It's not just rolling dice. It's not just rolling dice and going, oh, let's get lucky here. It's not what it is. Casting lots is doing a vote. So if you have 2 people and you want to cast lots, basically what you're saying is, let's have a vote. And usually you would vote by either raising your right hand or your left hand. So if you're in favor, you would raise your right hand. If you're opposed, you raise your left hand. You're voting. So we do this today with elections. You cast your ballots, your lot, if you will. So it's interesting, right? You're voting. It's your choice to vote for whatever politician or political party. You mark a little X. And if that X is outside that circle, it doesn't count. They throw it away. but it's basically a vote. We see this with, I forget the two disciples. I think one was Matthias, the other one was Justice. Can't remember the other guy's name for some reason, it just evades me. But they had to vote on which person. And they probably just did a bit of an analysis and said which one was amongst us while Jesus had his ministry, when Jesus was coming and going with us for 3 years, 3.5 years. And then they had to vote. They had to vote. They cast lots. So perhaps it was unanimous that they said Matthias was with us the most times versus this other guy. So they voted for him, and now he's the 12th apostle. It's kind of interesting, right? Anyways, that's it for this video. If you got something out of this, feel free to subscribe. Feel free to give a thumbs up. Leave a comment. Let me know where you're watching these videos from. I don't want to give you too many decisions to make, but I think one of the most important things is to, if nothing else, leave a thumbs up. That just lets, again, YouTube know that you got something out of this video, and YouTube will show it to more people. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you in another video. Bye for now.